And good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first in a video series I'm going to call In the Weather World, where we're just going to take a look at what's going on in weather, and we'll talk about the whys behind it as well. It's January 18th, 2017, and let's go ahead and get started because we've got a lot to talk about. Now, we've been in a very mild pattern for the last several months. We're going to take a look at why that's been the case. We're also going to take a look at the pattern change that I think is coming. I've been hinting about it. We're going to take a look at that and kind of what's leading to it as well. And of course, the question with any pattern change is how long will it last? We'll kind of take a look at that, and will it have any implications for how February is going to shape up? So the mild pattern, it's been a very mild winter so far, and this is the biggest reason. We have the Pacific Jet, and this is the part of the jet stream that goes over the Pacific Ocean. You can see it right here, and it's been incredibly strong, and it's been like this since the fall. And if you correlate the colors here with the color bar on the side here, these are winds that are over 170 knots, which is over 200 miles an hour. So incredibly strong winds in this Pacific Jet. And what this does is it does two things. One, it floods the country with mild air. And you really can't get cold when you have the country being flooded with mild air. The other thing it does is it keeps the pattern very progressive. And what that means is nothing is sustained. So you get one storm system that moves through, it pushes out, some nicer weather moves in for a couple days, and then a couple days later, another storm system pushes through. And it's just kind of this cycle that repeats over and over, and nothing is ever able to be sustained. And that's what we've been seeing over the last little bit. And I've mentioned this in my winter forecast here, and I said if the Pacific Jet remains strong through the winter, it will lead to a progressive pattern, alternating cold warmth, and fast-moving storms, not a lot of snowfall, and a lack of cold air. We've seen a couple Arctic outbreaks so far this winter, but we haven't seen anything sustained. They've been 2 to 4 or 5 days in length, and then we're right back into the 50s, 60s, and a couple days have even hit the 70s so far this winter. So it's been a very mild winter so far, but I think that is about to change, and we'll take a look more at that. Now, this map gives you some bearings here. Here's the United States, there's Europe, Russia, Siberia. And this is essentially if you were to go way above the North Pole and look down on the Earth. So this is just the northern hemisphere. And this is the midpoint of the atmosphere that we're looking at here. This is where all the storm systems reside. We call this the 500 millibar map. And a couple features here. Got the polar vortex right here. This is where the heart of the cold air sits. And notice how it's elongated west to east. That's bad if you want cold air in the United States, because the cold air is not spilling out of the polar vortex and down south towards us. Instead, it's being trapped where the polar vortex sits. It's also over Alaska right now. In fact, Alaska has temperatures that are minus 30 to minus 50 right now. Little system coming on shore, or has come on shore, is over the desert southwest. Another system just offshore, another system in the Pacific as well. And these are all going to continue to slam onshore as well. You've probably heard California has received a lot of rain recently, and this is why we keep getting system after system after system that just keeps pushing in. And again, the Pacific Jet, again, is the reason behind all of this. It just keeps shoving all this energy right into the country here. Now, all these pieces of energy follow the flow, and they're staying to the south right now. We have a little bit of a ridge on the east coast, which is also part of the reason why we've had this mild pattern. But we're going to start to see this change. Now, what you're going to see happen is all these little pieces of energy, as they start to push in, they're going to try to push into this ridge, but that would actually violate the laws of physics. You can't shove an area of low pressure into an area of high pressure, the ridge being the high, each piece of energy being the low. So what's going to happen is instead of following the flow pattern and going into the ridge, which it can't, it's going to undercut the ridge. And what that's going to do is it's going to start to push the ridge to the north. As you push the ridge to the north, it's also going to start to push the polar vortex towards the other side of the hemisphere. And you're going to see that here. As we go into Friday, this piece of energy starts to push underneath the ridge here. Again, it can't go into the ridge, but it undercuts it. The ridge has moved a little bit further north. We'll go into Saturday here. We have another piece of energy right here. Again, it's going to try to go into to the north. It can't, so it's going to push east, and it's starting to push this ridge. Notice how the ridge is now in Canada, and the polar vortex now sits on the other side of the hemisphere. So now we've started to alter the flow pattern a little bit. And this piece of energy right here will actually be a significant one. And as we go into Sunday here, that low moves here. Now I said it was a significant one because it will probably bring some severe weather to the deep south and will bring us some rain, possibly heavy rain, Sunday and into Monday here. But again, that low, instead of ending up here, it's now down here. So it's undercutting the ridge. The ridge has been pushed up into Canada. Polar vortex is now on the other side of the hemisphere, and we've really started to alter the flow pattern. Now, take a look at that low for the weekend here. Here's the initial surface low. It tried to go north, it died out, and a new low formed here around the Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas area. And this will push eastward, and as it does, it will bring severe weather down across the deep south, the Gulf Coast states. And as we go into Sunday, here's the low. It's a very strong low, and it will bring us a chance of rain. And again, I think there will be some periods of heavy rain as well, especially on Monday as this system pushes through. It'll push out, and there could be some snow across interior New England. For us, though, this will be another rain event. It'll just be too warm to bring any sort of winter precipitation with this. But this storm system really begins the pattern change. The ridge is way up here now, and we've now put a trough over the east coast. Polar vortex is still over here, so we still don't have true Arctic cold on our side of the hemisphere, but we've started to establish a trough. And again, troughs are typically cooler than normal weather. However, in this case, it's not necessarily cold air yet. And the reason why, take a look at the flow pattern. If you follow these lines, they still come in off the Pacific. So you're still getting that mild Pacific air flooding the country. If you want cold air, you really need a northwest flow from where cold air resides. The other thing that will happen with this is that because the polar vortex sits up here, the temperature gradients across the Pacific weaken, and that in turn causes the Pacific jet to weaken. And because we're starting to weaken the Pacific jet, the flow coming in off the Pacific will start to weaken. And what you're going to see happen is, as we go to the map here, this is not this Saturday, but next Saturday, day 10, we get a ridge to form on the west coast. We get the trough on the east coast. We still have the trough on the east coast, but now we have the ridge on the west coast. But look at where the flow is coming from now. It now comes from the north, across Canada, from the Arctic. So now we've established a colder pattern. It's still not a snowstorm or an Arctic cold pattern, because again, the polar vortex still over here. There's no blocking over Greenland. So we still don't have that snowstorm pattern or the Arctic cold pattern, but we've established a colder pattern. So this will, by day 10, highs will probably return back into the 30s and we'll start to turn colder. But it's not going to be highs in the 20s and, you know, the wind chills in the teens and single digits like we saw a couple times already. But this will be a colder pattern, and this will start the real cold pattern. We go into the first week of February, the models, and this comes from our climate model, really start to go bullish on the cold pattern here. Polar vortex, look at where it is now. We start to see blocking develop over Greenland. We still have our flow coming from the Arctic and Canada. And actually, this is now what we call cross-polar flow. It's coming from Eurasia, Siberia, across the Arctic, and then down into North America. That's what we call cross-polar flow. And that's really when you get the cold air, the Arctic, the true Arctic air masses that push down. And again, we still have the ridge on the west coast. And because you have the ridge on the west coast, there has to be a trough downstream of it. You can't have a ridge next to a ridge. That doesn't make any sense. So that's what the first week of February, if this model is correct. And it may not be. So that's something to keep in mind. Nothing is set in stone with this, but I do think we will push to a colder pattern, at least relative to the mild weather that we've been seeing. And if we look at the entire month as a whole, we still have the trough on the east coast. The polar vortex is still here. We have established blocking over Greenland. We still have the ridge over the west coast. We still have our cross-polar flow. So if this model is correct, and this is the what we call the climate forecast system, it's a very, very long-range model. This goes out months trying to forecast the weather. This is one of the American models. The European seasonal model also shows this. So February is actually looking rather interesting. So we'll see if that pans out, and we'll see if it actually turns out to be as interesting as what the models are showing. But again, nothing is ever set in stone when you forecast this, but it does look like everything is shaping up to turn February cold, and that would line up with my winter forecast. February, per my winter forecast, was the cold and stormy month. So we'll see how that works out. Hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, weather updates will always be on the Facebook page and the website.